So he developed the concept of the death drive.
Mm-hmm.
So he saw the death drive as the as another drive which was transformed into what he called aggression, I call hostility. Hostile aggression. When he used the term aggression, I use aggression another way now, but do remind me to refer to that somewhere too, which is important in my work. But at any rate, so Freud saw the death drive, and then for some reason he felt that he seemed to consider that he could only deal with two drives in order, and so instead of developing a concept of three drives, he lumped the ego drive and the sexual drive into one drive, which he called libido, and established the libido as a contrast to the mortido. And he never used the word mortido. Bern, in summarizing psychoanalysis, used the word mortido. He just used the German word for death drive. So he talked about the death drive and the life drive, which was but used the word libido for life drive. And so he saw the battle between these two drives. And I have written, and I'll get back to that. Well, I have written one article which is attached here about the unconscious, which was published in PAJ, Unconscious Drives Reimagined, where I got back to Freud's concept a little bit, and ego, talked about id-ego and superego, and included my view, a little bit of view, and it was published in the THA in fairly recently. Anyway, it's attached, and in 2008, and then I wrote another article, which was the one I really was where I talked then about my concept of three drives, and that's the article entitled What Motivates Resilience After Trauma, October 2008. And I inserted my concept of the three drives into that article. And
how did it start? That you differentiate from 2 to 3 drives?
Well, I started out saying that really we might as well talk about three drives. Freud should have talked about three drives, really, that's how I started. Why did he settle for two drives? And I sort of thought Freud should have had ego, sex, and death, if he wanted that.
Okay.
And then I transformed these three into survival, which I would parallel the ego drive, and then the other drive, the creative drive, instead of the sex drive. And then the third drive, instead of the death drive, I don't see the transience drive, the drive of being outside reality, rather than the morbid, although death would be the ultimate of the transience of being outside life. So then my descriptions are completely different from Freud's. So there is my description then, but I have to give credit to Freud, and I really jump over TA. I was conflicted about it, and I try in this article to reconcile my concept of drives, which I then started calling motivators. I needed to find another word for them, and I used motivators as what motivates action, what motivates behavior, and I did try to reconcile the concept of motivators with the concept of ego drives by saying that any one of our motivators can manifest itself through any one of the ego drive, any one of the ego states. And there is some kind of a drawing there which tries to show that. As I say, it's a book. It's really a book that needs to be written, where much more of this needs to be spelled out, and much more the concept of motivators needs to be spelled out, and what is to be included in each motivator. I did include in the article, I did include what I call attributes for each motivator in order to answer the statement that some people will then pick up one. The concept of the three motivators is easy to pick up. Many people, when I describe it, people easily pick up the idea that our energy, that our basic energy operates, I'm going to summarize it, our basic energy operates through three drives. However, each drive wants to use the whole energy, so that it is possible sometimes to be using a combination of both drives or motivators. I'm going to use the term interchangeably. I use motivators in order for us not to confuse it with fertilized drives, but I really mean drives, all right. So it's possible for two of them to combine, but it's not possible for the three of them. So the conflict exists between before we talk about conflict, I talk about the fact that our moods, our behaviors, our sense of self rotates among the three drives, although at various times we may be operating with two drives but not three. The analogy being we can be walking forwards and sideways or backwards and sideways. We can't be walking forwards, backwards and sideways at the same time. So there's always a transition, but one of the drives of the three can be coming in as a transition to coming in with the third drive. And actually I called my concept at a certain point balanced energy therapy, because very much of my work then consisted in working with people in talking about balancing your use of energy, that you can help people transform dysfunctional behavior by becoming more aware of what drive it relates to or what motivator it relates to, and seeing to what extent you want to emphasize that motivator rather than another one, or seeing in what way one motivator is in conflict with the other. Perhaps I should start by summarizing once again. And I realize that I'm talking in a rather confusing way, and if you look at the article it might help you, but as I say, it's going to be your job to really develop a whole book, because there are examples which I tried to use about people who are primarily motivated by one kind of drive and primarily motivated by another one.
As far as I know, to talk a little bit confusing, it's for you, it's to activate your passion.
Yes. Maybe I should talk about myself. I know that whenever I am in passion, I am in a different condition, and if I happen to have physical pain, somehow I don't feel the pain. Let me backtrack. Let me backtrack and talk about the attributes of these three drives. I list them in the article, but the attribute of servia, is survival, everything. And our time structure, by the way, operates differently according to which drive one is in. Servia is the only one where we operate with chronological time structure. When we are in the other drive, pasha, we are outside of time. We don't lose track of time, just as we lose track of our bodily organism. And when we are in transia, which is the drive outside daily life, we again lose track of time. We are in a meditative or sleep or outside daily reality. So attributes of Servia are all bodily feelings or physiological reactions. Also fear, anxiety, shame, guilt, pride, sadness, disgust, longing, and so on. There's also the fight-flight reaction is a Servia reaction. Stroke needs are Servia reactions. Greed, competitiveness, gluttony, covetousness, envy, jealousy. Very many of these attributes which operate when one is getting counseling are attributes of Servia. And Servia is what one comes into treatment for or counseling for mostly. Well, in Pasha, one does not seek treatment. Attributes of Pasha, very importantly, is sexuality in all its form. So where I differ with Freud is that I don't see sexuality as being the drive and
it's more expression of the drive than quite itself.
It's one expression of the drive, which is basically a creative and a species survival drive. So certainly sexuality leads to having children as one concrete result, but species survival, but also all the inventions and discoveries of human beings, all creativity. So I do not go for Freud's theory of sublimation and Freud himself said, before creativity, sexuality lets down its arms. Psychoanalysis lays down its arms. In front of creativity, psychoanalysis lays down its arms, that you cannot explain it, although sometimes he talks about sublimation. So Pasha is for the survival of the species and is represented by sexuality in all its forms as well as tendencies that demand free expression, and including joy, self-determination, freedom, sense of meaning. The whole to-do about meaning has to do with Pasha. Viktor Frankl has based his psychotherapy on therapy on finding meaning, and he's right in the sense that whenever one helps a client identify with meaning for his or her life, they get to script, and they are not suicidal or murderers or anything of that kind. You hear that there's a lot of jumble in what I present. And this is what I mean by saying it's a book that hasn't been written. It's a form of thinking that has been helpful to me in working as a therapist and as a counselor. So the third, what about the third drive? The third drive is, so I was listing attributes for Pasha. Whatever leads to discovery, invention, creativity, procreation, playfulness, excitement, enthusiasm, optimism, courage, arousal. Sometimes Pasha also leads to obsessive determinism, but in the pursuit of an invention or a discovery. Pasha is not all joy and happiness. Madame Curie, who is my favorite example for Pasha, certainly worked obsessively hard, and at a certain point in her life, when it was clear that the work with radium was causing her cancer, her grown daughters urged her to drop her work, to stop going to her laboratory. There was no survival sense to going. She didn't. She had 2 Nobel Prizes. She chose to continue working that way, and of course died of cancer. So Transha is the third drive, which is the Transha which leads where you escape reality, transcend all broad, otherworldly, spiritual, religious, completely outside of the other motivators, calm, peacefulness, restfulness, etc. In animals, Pasha is only expressed through sleep, and in human beings too. When we sleep, we dream, and in dream we have this mixture of Pasha of Transha and Pasha, where we have all these images that appear, that may be creating images that do not, however, find a way of transforming themselves, or sometimes there are many examples of authors or inventors who thought of their, or who discovered or thought of their discoveries.
There are a lot of methods, just like yoga or others, who try to activate some way Transha, even if it sounds a bit particular if you talk about activating Transha, but to get in it.
Yeah. And sometimes they activate Transha, and sometimes
and even your little exercise, cold in, warm out.
Oh yes. My favorite exercise that we should attach a copy of that. Although that is also attached to my biography written by Siegfried Röhl, but it's in German. But I have the version in English, which is my favorite meditation for. That's a contribution, I consider, meditation for impatient people. I do not have the ability to go into very deep meditation, or I've done it occasionally in workshops, or way back in India I was able to do it, but in my daily life I'm not able to get myself into meditation. But I can do this 5-minute meditation and get completely outside everyday life.
So, and what you say, we experience to be in one or to be driven by one or the other motivator exclusively, or usually they are more or less mixed up. What's your idea about it?
Well, my description, I described that a little in both these articles on the is that we keep, in daily life, we keep moving minute by minute from one to the other. And most of the time we are operating with one, and the other one is in the background, and the third one is in the far background.
Okay.
So the third one is way back. And I describe, for instance, a typical day in a young woman. She wakes up, she was deep in Transha, but also in Pasha. She was dreaming. Alarm clock brings her into Servia. She proceeds to dress and so on, have breakfast and everything. But maybe while she's in the shower, she has some ideas and some fantasies. She's on the train, she might relax and get into Transha, or she might be thinking about a project that she's concrete at work, and she's in Servia. So there's a lot of movement. She gets off, she's at work. She may be concentrating on her work, and it's distasteful work perhaps, and that's only Servia. She's pushing herself. Servia is the one that allows the ego states more easily, although I indicate that any one of the drives may operate through any one of our ego states. Pasha may operate through our child ego state more easily, but Servia operates
Servia is expressed in all of them.
Yes. So that it is when, perhaps I should say this, that my therapy work, my counseling work, in the course of the last year or so, I was always conscious of the three egos, the three drives, and always looking at what was going on with my client. The client was facing me both in the here and now, what motivator the client was in, and in what way any kind of a problem the client described, or a kind of a wish, how that was related. Was I going to reinforce one or the other? And then in the course of the transference and counter-transference process, I was more and more preoccupied with what was going on in the client and what was going on in me, because the client might stimulate counter-transference in me and might send me off into Transha or into Pasha. Whereas I consider that as a conscientious counselor in order to maintain my adult, and I really aim to keep my servia going primarily. It's complicated. You started making a point about me personally, and in terms of noticing myself, I do know that it is Trangia that makes it possible for, I'm sorry, I said Trangia, I meant Pasha. Pasha that keeps me going during a workshop. And I've had a lot of physical problems, certainly standing was one of them, pain standing. And I've experienced on and on being in doing a workshop, starting sitting down and set up to be sitting and to be working, and an hour later somebody points out that we've been doing a long time, it's time for a pause. And I noticed that I've been standing for the past hour, that as I started working with people, I stood up and never realized I was standing. The pain was gone. I do know that a lot of modern pain therapy is done by getting people into trance, trying to get them into transia, getting into
so it makes them selective or sedative or something.
To be done with hypnosis or getting meditation.
So getting out of the world a bit,
Getting outside, because I believe that pain, that whenever there is pain, one is in Surya. And so
at least if you suffer with pain,
So whenever there is suffering with pain, it's in Surya. And I've been trying to use that kind of stuff for self-therapy. And I'm sure that later on there's all this new work being done with all these, see, the way I say this, you're going to have to write the book or some other people, because it's going to depend on learning to see what are the circuits that operate. There's a lot of new work being done now. The amygdala seems to be very important in certain ways, on and on. When they talk about depression, they talk about the role of the amygdala, but also other areas of the brain and various circuits that are moving. And when they talk about manic depression, they talk about other circuits. Pasha may be connected with manic conditions. Trangia is probably connected with depressive conditions. We talk about pathology, and you see the book that needs to be written is a way of connecting pathology, connecting the various circuits that operate in the brain, and distinguishing the various attributes, and seeing that the attributes, the attributes are transitional objects for identifying the drive.
Yeah, but you're talking about pathology. That's more the therapeutic part. But what I really like about this kind of to distinguish the three drives, and for me, to be honest, I'm like much more the expression of drives than of motivators. Motivators in some way it's more technically, and drives is more energetic, and it's more close to the vital energy. But what in particular in our profession, we have to deal sometimes with somebody suffering within the survival on certain problems or whatever it is. But the other way around is what we really like to give an idea to use Pasha to invent one's own future, or even in a company to get off on a level what we would say kill the dragon, but to get to a kind of idea how to win the princess, meaning to change the energy, the culture, the identification, the self-esteem to something they really feel it's meaningful and they long for, and for sure not to feel the pain when they try to achieve it, because it will cost energy, and it will cost time, and it will cost some efforts to get there. And but to give an idea how we as humans and we as a organization of humans can develop ourselves.
Yeah.
And therefore I think it's beyond TA maybe, or beyond therapeutic approach.
Beyond balanced energy therapy, I call it, or beyond existential pattern therapy. These are the fancy names that I give to my existential pattern therapy is what I like to use in German. EVA, existenzielle Verhaltensmusteranalyse, is a long German term, but gives us nice letters. EVA, like EVA.
EVA, like Eve, that's quite nice. And I think that makes things different. What I as well got the experience that sometimes we are, let's say, in a different mood or whatever it is, and then it seems that we are different persons, or perhaps different personality, meaning to be in Pasha could be perceived inside me as outside, as completely different as being in Serbia or in Trancha. So, and sometimes how one of our questions is how we integrate, or is there necessary to integrate the different kind of personalities, or are these all options we have to express ourselves and to live our life? And I think it is.
Well, the well-lived life, so to speak, is the one where we have benefited from all three.
That's right.
The well-lived life, the energy, we use the energy in various ways. We certainly do need Serbia energy to just take care of ourselves, otherwise we'd be neglecting our bodies.
Yeah, we would.
Serbia
would
is
die in accidents with cars or whatever it is.
Serbia is related to our body, and our mind in everyday experience, our mind and our feelings. Yes, many of them. Trancha and Pasha are the ways in which human beings have evolved drives that exist in animals in different ways. The Pasha drive corresponds exclusively to the way in which animals are driven to have babies. This is why it seems to me interesting that the reason religious groups are so involved with the whole business of reproduction is because it has to do with perpetuating something into the future. But the power of religious groups goes through Trancha. That people are, it's when people are in an exalted religious frame of mind that they are in Trancha. In Trancha with Pasha. And the Catholic Church, of course, has known how to combine both of these very well with all the imagery, including the imagery of suffering of Christ on the cross. So it's very, very attractive.
And Pasha is often it's has a very reduced room in religious and either the Christian or Islamic or others, and even to those in Far East.
That's right.
They emphasis on Trancha.
Trancha and Pasha, the combination of, and of course suicide bombers are taken over by, are in a combination of Tranja and Pasha. So
in exclude the survival. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe
I think that it is in these conditions that people can take on episcripts, it occurs to me. That they are vulnerable to episcripts through these two drives. And these are the drives that, for me, when you asked before where is the conflict is because we can't be in all three drives at once. So there has to be movement, and on the one hand, the only way we can be balanced in the world is by the rotation of drives, like different drives using our energy. And perhaps I would define life as being the use of energy in rotation.
Okay. So let's rotate a bit.
Before, when you talked about, we talked about me and an example of me, and certainly I have tried to use my understanding of drives as a way of self-treatment. I have not been very successful. I succeed occasionally. Certainly, I've been able to talk to you now a lot through Pasha, and partly this is why I ramble.
What I always recognize is when we talk about a new workshop or something else, you were completely in Pasha, and you really like to do this.
Yeah.
Just like you agreed upon this kind of video. The next step after you agreed, Serbia comes in, and you try to structure everyone and everything, and sometimes in a way that even wouldn't help you, but at least it's structured and gave some kind of idea. Maybe it could be work, but better if you have a clear explanation of the expectations and the clear definition of the expectations, then maybe you can deal with it or not. And when before you start, you usually go in your short meditation and get into the Pasha, get Tranja, and therefore I think I often perceived you in all this kind of, but I think what you really kept alive is Pasha. Yes,
and that's what keeps me alive. And I think that again, nature is very good, because a peaceful death, which is what I think about, of course, at this age, means getting into Tranja and then sliding into death, and there it does reunite with Freud's concept of the death drive. Of course, he used. I wanted to say something about aggression. Aggression can be understood with all three drives. Freud was trying to understand aggression and harmful aggression, and saw it as being a transformation, a way to escape. And I could say that my adaptation of Freud's idea would be that Servia, its suggestion by Servia that the way to escape death is to pass it on to somebody else. In a way, the implication is that, in a way, I just realized that my concept of episcript, in a way, is a transformation of the Freudian idea. Just didn't realize that before.
To, I would say, the opponent, the antagonist, just like Byrne and the school around him. And during your life, you integrated lots of other stuff. And even at least at the end, there are some other some Freudian stuff in and could be credited, or what do you say? Gewürdigt, valued. Valued.
Yeah.
And maybe that is an interesting
bridge.
Bridge.
Yeah, maybe.